Artemis, the virgin goddess, and her secret bloody hunts. In the hushed dominion of the ancient world, where gods walked among mortals and the veil between realms was thin, there are whispers. Whispers carried on the night wind, through the rustling leaves of primeval forests and across the silvered peaks of untrodden mountains. They speak of a power as old as the moon itself, a presence both serene and savage. They speak of a goddess. Not a goddess of the hearth, nor of the harvest fields. Not a queen of the pantheon, bound by marriage and duty. No, they speak of the eternal maiden, the untamed spirit, the mistress of the wild. They speak of Artemis. Her name evokes images of lunar grace, of a gentle protectress of the young and the vulnerable. She is the guardian of the newborn, the swift helper of women in the throes of childbirth. But beneath the silver veneer of purity lies a darker, more primal truth. A truth written in blood, echoed in the cries of the hunted, and carved into the very stone of tragic monuments. For Artemis is a paradox. She is the virgin goddess, whose chastity is not a sign of meekness, but a declaration of absolute sovereignty. And to protect that sovereignty, she presides over hunts that are not for sustenance, but for retribution. Secret, bloody hunts where the quarry is not beast but man. Welcome, seekers of lore, to the Eldritch Codex. Today we journey deep into the moonlit wilderness of Greek mythology. We will pull back the bowstring and take aim at the heart of one of the most complex, revered, and feared deities of the Olympian pantheon. We will uncover the stories that define her, the tragedies that shadow her name, and the unyielding code that governs her domain. This is the story of Artemis, the virgin goddess, and her secret, bloody hunts. To understand the huntress, we must first understand her origin. To know the arrow, we must first know the hand that forged the bow. The story of Artemis does not begin in a tranquil, sunlit grove, but in the heart of a cosmic drama, born from an act of divine love and the terrible persecution that followed. Her story begins with her mother, the gentle Titaness Leto. In the timeless chronicles of the gods, Leto was graced with a perilous gift, the affection of Zeus, the king of Olympus. And as with so many whom Zeus favored, this divine attention came with the catastrophic price, the unyielding, all-consuming wrath of his queen, Hera. Hera, queen of the heavens, would not suffer a rival, nor the fruit of her husband's infidelity. She unleashed a curse of profound cruelty upon Leto. She decreed that no land that rested on the firm foundations of the earth, no place touched by the rays of the sun, would grant the Titaness sanctuary to give birth. Furthermore, Hera sent the monstrous serpent Python, a chthonic horror born of the earth's primal slime, to hunt Leto across the world, ensuring she would find no rest, no peace, no haven. And so began Leto's ordeal. She became a divine refugee, her womb heavy with the children of the most powerful god, yet spurned by all creation. Every city barred its gates. Every king feared Hera's retribution. Every island pushed her away. The entire world, under the dominion of the jealous queen, became a prison without walls for the desperate mother-to-be. But the will of Zeus and the dictates of fate cannot be so easily denied. In her agony, Leto found a place unbound by Hera's curse, for it was not truly land. It was a desolate, floating rock, once a nymph named Asteria who had flung herself into the sea to escape Zeus's advances. This drifting island, sometimes called Ortygia, the Isle of Quails, had no roots in the earth's foundation. It was a loophole in a divine decree. Guided by Poseidon, Leto reached this final sanctuary. Zeus anchored the floating rock to the seabed with 4 mighty pillars, and it would henceforth be known as Delos Brilliant, or Manifest. Here, beneath the solitary palm tree, clutching its trunk in the agony of labor, Leto's 9-day torment was set to end. The fates had woven it so. A new power was about to enter the cosmos. The first to be born was a daughter, a child not of sunlight and warmth, but of the cool, clear luminescence of the stars. She emerged into existence fully formed in spirit, her eyes holding the ancient wisdom of the night sky. She was Artemis. And in the very first moments of her divine life, her essential nature was revealed. She was not a helpless babe who cried for comfort. With the strength and preternatural resolve that defied her newborn form, she immediately turned to her exhausted mother. For 9 more grueling days and 9 more agonizing nights, as Leto struggled to deliver her second child, it was the infant Artemis who served as her midwife. Ponder this for a moment, for it is the key to her entire being. Her very first act in the universe was not to receive, but to give aid. Her first instinct was not to seek protection but to provide it. She presided over the sacred, perilous passage of her own twin brother, Apollo, from the darkness of the womb into the light of the world. This single, foundational act forever bound Artemis as the Karatrophos, the protector of the young, the guardian of mothers, and the divine helper of women in the throes of childbirth. It is a role of profound compassion, of life-giving grace, a role that stands in stark, chilling contrast to the cold, lethal hunts and the remorseless vengeance she would later command. From her first breath the paradox was forged. She was the bringer of life and, as the world would soon learn, the swift and merciless dealer of death. Her childhood, if such a mortal term can even apply to a god, was a fleeting moment defined not by play but by purpose. At the tender age of 3, Artemis journeyed to the peak of Olympus. She did not go to be coddled or admired. She went to negotiate the terms of her own existence. Boldly she climbed onto the knee of her father, the mighty Zeus, ruler of gods and men. She looked him in the eye, her own gaze unwavering, and she did not ask. She demanded. And her demands were not the whimsical requests of a child for toys or sweets. They were the foundational articles of a life's constitution, a solemn declaration of eternal, unbreachable independence. First and most paramount, she asked for Ionian Parthenian eternal virginity. This was not a plea born of shyness or fear, but a calculated political and personal maneuver. She had witnessed the plight of her mother, a pawn in Zeus's desires. She had seen the rage of Hera, a prisoner of marriage. She saw how the fates of countless goddesses and nymphs were dictated by desire, by alliances, by the whims of male gods. Artemis would belong to no one. Her body, her will, and her destiny would be her own forever. She would be a queen in her own right, not a consort. Second, she asked for the tools of her trade. A bow and a quiver of arrows, but not just any. She demanded they be forged by the Cyclopes, the same master artisans who crafted her father's thunderbolts. And she specified that her bow must be the equal of her brother Apollo's. From the very beginning she would accept no lesser status. She would be his perfect twin in the art of the silent, unerring kill. She asked for a hunting tunic, a saffron chiton hemmed at the knee, so she could run through the forests and mountains without impediment. Practicality, not pageantry, was her creed. She asked for a retinue, 60 daughters of Oceanus, all 9 years of age, and 20 river nymphs from the Amnisus River in Crete. And they all, she stipulated, must share her vow of chastity. She was not merely seeking companions. She was building a sisterhood, a sacred band, a court that would live by her laws in a kingdom of her own making. Finally, she asked for her dominion. She did not ask for a city shimmering with gold or a gilded palace on Olympus. She asked for the mountains. All of them. The wild, untrodden peaks, the dark, rustling forests, the places where civilization ended and primal nature began. There she could run with her hounds, her hair flying free, under the lone gaze of the moon. She would accept one city to be dedicated in her name, but her true throne would be a mountain peak, her scepter a silver bow. Zeus, the king of gods, was utterly captivated. He saw in his daughter not the echo of her mother Leto, nor of himself, but a spirit entirely new, entirely her own. He smiled, a rare, genuine smile, and granted her every request, and more. He gave her not just the mountains, but dominion over the untamed wilds, the harbors of the sea, and the streets and highways of the world. He made her the light-bringer and confirmed her role as the guardian of birthing mothers. And so Artemis the maiden, the virgin huntress, was fully formed. Not shaped by the slow passage of time, but forged in a single, incandescent moment of pure will. Her identity was now a fortress, built upon the vows she extracted from the most powerful being in existence. Her eternal chastity was its highest, most unassailable wall. Her silver bow was its formidable gatehouse. Her loyal nymphs were its ever-vigilant sentinels. But all who build a fortress must be prepared to defend it. And the world would soon discover that the defense of Artemis's sacred fortress would be swift, absolute, and drenched in blood. The fortress of Artemis's identity, founded upon her vow of eternal virginity, was not a solitary citadel. It was a living, breathing community, a sacred circle of huntresses bound by an oath as inviolable as their goddess's own. They were her shadows and her companions, moving as one through the untamed wilds. They shared the thrill of the chase, the scent of pine on the night air, and the quiet communion of a world free from the discordant notes of masculine ambition and desire. And among this cherished sisterhood, there was one who shone brighter in the goddess's favor, one whose devotion was as pure as the spring water from which they drank. Her name was Callisto. Some chronicles name her a nymph, a daughter of the Arcadian river gods. Others a mortal princess, daughter of King Lycaon, who had forsaken the stifling confines of a palace for the boundless freedom of the forest. Whatever her origin, her position was undisputed. She was Artemis's dearest companion, her most trusted lieutenant. They hunted side by side, their strides matched, their aims true. The bond between them was the living embodiment of the goddess's ideal, a perfect, self-sufficient world of female strength and loyalty. This sanctuary, however, this perfect world, existed under the ever-watchful gaze of Olympus. And the eyes of Zeus in particular are drawn to earthly beauty as a moth is to a fatal flame. From his celestial throne he looked down upon the Arcadian forest, and he saw Callisto. And in seeing her he desired her. The king of the gods knew of the sacred vow. He knew Callisto's heart was wholly devoted to her mistress and her oath. She would never yield to him, not through persuasion nor through force, for her loyalty was absolute. And so, knowing he could not win her consent, Zeus resorted to a deception of unparalleled cruelty, a violation so profound it would not only shatter a life, but desecrate the very meaning of trust. He descended from Olympus, cloaking his true nature. He would not approach her as the king of gods, nor as a beast, nor as a mortal man. He would approach her in the one form she would never question, the one form she would welcome with an open heart and an open embrace. He disguised himself as Artemis. He found her separated from the other hunters. He mirrored the goddess's walk, her voice, the very light in her eyes. Callisto, seeing her beloved mistress, bowed her head in reverence and welcomed the approaching figure. The false Artemis embraced her, and for a moment it was an embrace of sisterly affection. It was only when the embrace tightened, when it became something foreign, demanding, and violent, that Callisto understood the horrifying truth. She fought. She screamed. But a nymph or even a princess is no match for the raw power of the cosmos, the unyielding will of the king of the gods. In that lonely, sun-dappled clearing, the sanctity of her body was profaned. Her sacred vow, the bedrock of her identity, was shattered by an act of cosmic treachery. Broken and terrified, Callisto returned to the band of huntresses, but she was no longer one of them. The light in her eyes was gone, replaced by the shadow of a terrible secret. She tried to carry on as before, to laugh and hunt, but a gnawing fear consumed her. How could she face the goddess whose most sacred law now grew, as a guilty secret, within her very womb? The seasons turned. The evidence of Zeus's crime could no longer be concealed by a simple tunic. Her steps grew heavier, her participation in the hunt faltered. Then came a day, high in the heat of summer, when Artemis led her companions to a crystal-clear spring, deep in a grotto on Mount Maenalus, to bathe and find respite from the sun. The nymphs shed their garments, their joyous shouts echoing off the cool cavern walls. But Callisto hesitated. She pulled her tunic tighter, her eyes darting about for an escape that did not exist. Artemis, whose gaze misses nothing in her domain, noted her companion's strange reluctance. Her usual patience, thin in matters of ritual purity, wore away. "Why do you linger, Callisto?" she demanded, her voice sharp, cutting through the laughter. "Join us." With no excuse left, and under the suspicious eyes of all, Callisto was compelled to undress. Or perhaps the other nymphs, sensing the deception, forced the tunic from her shoulders. The truth was laid bare for all to see. Her swollen belly, the undeniable physical proof of her broken oath. Here, we must pause. We must step back from the narrative and confront the nature of divine justice. To our modern sensibilities, Callisto is a blameless victim, a survivor deserving of compassion, comfort, and protection. But Artemis is not a goddess of modern sensibilities. She is a primal force, and her laws are as absolute and as impersonal as gravity. In her eyes, the reason for the broken vow was irrelevant. The deception, the violence, these were matters concerning Zeus. What Artemis saw before her, reflected in the sacred water of her grotto, was a stain upon the fabric of her existence. A pollution of her sanctum. A betrayal, however unwilling, of the foundational oath that defined her world. Her fortress had been breached from within, and the proof was undeniable. Her reaction was not of sorrow, but of cold, unadulterated, righteous fury. "Begone," her voice thundered, echoing with the power of the wild. "You are no longer one of us. Do not pollute these sacred waters with your presence." She banished Callisto from her sight, casting her out from the only home she had ever truly known. But this exile was only the beginning of her torment. The ancient myths, like rivers, often split into different streams. In one telling, it is Artemis herself, in the heat of her implacable rage, who inflicts the next punishment. She transformed the disgraced Callisto into a great, shaggy bear, her beautiful human form twisted into a beastly shape, condemned to be hunted in the very forest she once commanded. In another, perhaps more chilling version, the ever-vengeful Hera, finally discovering her husband's latest infidelity, descends to enact her own uniquely cruel justice. Seeing Callisto as a hated rival, it is Hera who strips away her human form. "Go now," the queen of the gods sneered, "and let this form that so charmed my husband now inspire terror." For 15 years, the creature that was once Callisto roamed the forests of Arcadia. She fled from the hunter she once led, from the very hounds that were once her playmates. She possessed the mind, the memories, and the grief of a woman, but the body and voice of a beast. Her greatest terror was her own son, Arcas, who had been raised by others and had grown into a great hunter in his own right, entirely unaware that the magnificent bear he so often tracked through the woods was his own mother. Then the day the fates had decreed finally arrived. The inevitable, tragic confrontation. Arcas cornered the great bear. Spear raised, he took aim, ready for the glorious kill. Callisto, seeing her son, forgot her form. She forgot the fangs and the claws. In her heart, she was a mother. She rose on her hind legs, a gesture not of aggression, but of a desperate, yearning embrace. But Arcas saw only a beast rearing up to attack. At the last possible moment, before the ultimate sin of matricide could be committed, Zeus intervened from the heavens. Perhaps moved by a rare flicker of guilt for the tragedy he had set in motion, he would not allow it to reach its horrific conclusion. He sent a whirlwind to snatch them both from the earth, mother and son, lifting them up into the eternal darkness of the night sky. There he transformed them into the constellations we know as Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the Great Bear and the Little Bear. A glittering, celestial memorial to a life of profound suffering. A constant, silent reminder, forever circling the North Star, of a sacred vow, a divine betrayal, and a goddess's absolute, uncompromising wrath. Callisto's story is the first and perhaps the most sorrowful of Artemis's bloody hunts. It was not a hunt with bow and arrow, but a hunt for purity. A hunt where the price of a broken oath, even one broken by treachery and force, was exile, transformation, and the complete loss of self. If the tale of Callisto was a chilling tragedy of violated trust, the story of Actaeon serves as a far more direct and brutal lesson. It is a lesson in the mortal peril of violated sanctity. This was not a saga of betrayal unfolding over years, but a cataclysm of moments, a cautionary tale whispered in horror from Thebes to Athens, a story of an accidental trespass and a punishment of absolute horrifying finality. Our subject is Actaeon, a prince of the great city of Thebes. He was a young man at the zenith of his life, a student of the wise centaur Chiron who had taught him the noble arts. Above all, Actaeon was a master huntsman, renowned throughout Boeotia for his peerless skill with the spear and for his magnificent pack of 50 hounds. These dogs were his constant companions, his pride, and ultimately his doom. One day the sun beat down upon the slopes of Mount Cithaeron. The hunt had been long and successful, the nets and spears were stained with the blood of their quarry. The air was thick and still with the oppressive heat of noon. His companions resting in the shade, Actaeon, ever restless, decided to wander alone, deeper into the tangled woods. He was not seeking more prey, but merely a cool spring, a secluded spot to soothe his brow and escape the midday blaze. He walked without a clear path, drawn by the murmur of unseen water. He did not know that this particular valley, this specific grove, was a place held sacred. He did not know that he was treading upon ground consecrated to the virgin goddess. And he could not possibly know that deep within its shaded heart, in a grotto shielded by ancient cypresses and pines, Artemis herself had chosen that very moment to seek her own respite. The poet Ovid, with haunting clarity, describes the sanctuary. It was a place untouched by axe or artifice, a cave carved by nature herself into the living rock. A pool of the purest water gathered there, its surface undisturbed, its banks fringed with soft, green moss. It was named Gargaphia. Here, the untamed goddess, weary from her own hunt, had laid aside her javelin, her quiver, and her unstrung bow. Her nymphs attended her. Some gathered her hair, binding it in a knot. Others took her sandals and robes. They were in a state of divine vulnerability, a moment of sacred peace, utterly detached from the world of men and gods. It was a perfect, sealed moment of inviolable purity. It was into this precise moment, this sanctum sanctorum of the wild, that the mortal Prince Actaeon, by a fatal twist of fortune, was about to stumble. He parted the final veil of leaves, and his mortal eyes fell upon a sight no man was ever meant to witness. The goddess Artemis. Unveiled. Naked. An absolute silence fell upon the grotto. The joyous splashing of the nymph ceased. A score of divine eyes turned as one, their surprise quickly hardening into outrage. Actaeon stood frozen. Not by lust, the sight was too awesome, too terrifying for such a mortal emotion. He was paralyzed by a divine effulgence, a beauty so overwhelming it was akin to looking into the heart of a star. He had not intended this. This was a transgression born of pure, blameless chance. He had made a fatal, geographical mistake. But for Artemis, intention is a meaningless mortal distinction. The crime was absolute. The act itself was the totality of the offense. Her sacred privacy, the very essence of her independent being, had been profaned by a male mortal gaze. Her body, which she had vowed would belong to no one, had been seen. The nymphs shrieked and rushed to form a living shield around their goddess, but Artemis stood taller than them all, her fury radiating like heat. She instinctively reached for her bow, for her arrows, but her weapons were out of reach. It did not matter. Her wrath needed no tools. She scooped a handful of the sacred water, the very water that moments before had been a symbol of her purity, and now would become the agent of her vengeance. She flung it into Actaeon's face. As the cold droplet struck his skin, a curse, sharp and final, hissed from her divine lips. Nunc, she spoke, the Latin of Ovid's telling echoing with cold power, now go and tell, if you can tell, that you have seen Artemis unveiled. A terrible alchemy began. Horns, the long, branching antlers of a noble stag erupted from his forehead. His neck elongated, his ears grew pointed and tufted with fur. His arms and legs warped, thinning into the slender, powerful limbs of a deer, his hands and feet hardening into cloven hoofs. His skin, once the skin of a prince, coarsened into a mottled, rusted hide. He tried to cry out in protest, in terror, but his voice was gone, replaced by a guttural, inhuman groan. But the most horrific element of the curse was not what was changed, but what remained. Inside this terrified, fleeing beast was the pristine, untouched consciousness of Prince Actaeon. He caught his reflection in the surface of the pool and recoiled in horror. Tears, human tears, streamed from his new animal eyes. He could not speak. He could not explain. He could not beg for a mercy he knew would never come. He turned and fled, a creature of pure, instinctual panic. A storm of confusion raged in his human mind. Should he return to his palace? To the city? Or hide deeper in the woods that were now his prison? As he hesitated, he heard a sound that had once been music to his ears, but now it was a death knell. The baying of hounds. His hounds. His pack of 50, each dog bred for the chase, each one loyal to him, had caught his scent. Not the scent of their master, but the wild, musky scent of a stag. The scent of prey. The unseen hunt had begun. The greatest hunter in Thebes was now the hunted. He who had led the chase was now the quarry. He ran with the speed and grace of the deer he had become, a speed he had so often admired in his victims, but it was not enough. He knew the endurance of his own dogs. He knew there would be no escape. They closed in on him, his own faithful companions, their eyes burning with the thrill of the hunt. They did not recognize the terror and pleading in their master's eyes. They saw only flesh and fear. He tried to cry out, to form the words, "I am Actaeon. Recognize your master." But only the bleeding groan of a stag came from his throat, a sound that only excited the pack further. He fell to his knees on a rocky outcrop, a gesture of supplication of surrender. But his hound saw only a stag brought to bay at last. They swarmed over him. One sank its teeth into his back, another into his shoulder. The pack, his pride and joy, the dogs he had raised from pups, tore him limb from limb in a savage frenzy of bloodlust. The final, bitter irony came moments later. His fellow huntsmen arrived, following the sounds of the kill. They cheered the hounds on, lamenting aloud that their master, Actaeon, was not there to witness such a magnificent takedown. They called his name, searching for him, urging him to come and see, all while his lifeblood soaked into the forest floor, his spirit departing as his own dogs feasted upon his flesh. The hunt was over. Artemis's rage was sated. Her sanctity was restored, washed clean in the blood of the offender. The tale of Actaeon is a brutal, unyielding testament to the goddess's absolute nature. It is not a story of justice as mortals comprehend it. There was no trial, no weighing of intent, no concept of accident. There was only the transgression and the consequence. To gaze, however innocently, upon the sacred is to be consumed by it. To cross the boundary into the domain of a primal god is to forfeit one's own existence. Actaeon's bloody end is a warning carved into the very memory of the ancient world. The purity of Artemis is not a passive state. It is an active, lethal force, and her unseen presence in the wild is a threshold that mortals cross at their own ultimate peril. The wrath of Artemis was not a force unleashed solely in defense of her sacred chastity. It was a guardian of her entire being, her honor, and most critically, the honor of her family. The bond she shared with her twin brother, Apollo, was forged in the crucible of their perilous birth on Delos. Their loyalty to their mother, the Titaness Leto, who had suffered so grievously to bring them into the world, was absolute and non-negotiable. To slight one of them was to summon the fury of all three. No mortal ever learned this devastating lesson more completely than Niobe, the proud queen of Thebes. Niobe was a woman blessed by every fortune the gods could seemingly bestow. She was the wife of King Amphion, a ruler so gifted with the lyre that the very stones of Thebes were said to have risen from the earth and moved into place to form the city walls, charmed by his music. She was of noble birth, a daughter of the tragic Tantalus. She was wealthy, she was powerful, and above all else, she was proud. Her pride, however, was not rooted in her riches or her royal status. It was centered with an all-consuming intensity on her children. She was spectacularly fecund. She had borne 14 children in all, 7 strong and handsome sons, and 7 beautiful, graceful daughters. They were the center of her universe, the living, breathing monuments to her success and her superiority. On this day, a festival was being held in Thebes. The prophetess Manto had called upon the women of the city to honor Leto and her divine twins, to wreath their hair with laurel, and burn fragrant incense upon her altars. The women obeyed, their quiet prayers filling the air. Into this scene of pious devotion strode Queen Niobe, her entourage trailing behind her. She stopped, surveying the worshippers with disdain. Her voice, when she spoke, was not a suggestion, but a command, ringing with the fatal flaw of the Greeks, hubris. "What madness is this?" she proclaimed, her voice silencing the prayers. "To prefer gods you have only heard of to those you can see before you? Why is Leto worshipped at these altars while my own divinity has yet to receive its due? My father Tantalus was the only mortal ever permitted to feast with the gods. The Pleiades are my sisters. My husband built these very walls with his song. And yet you worship Leto." She began her fatal calculation. Leto's claim to divinity rests on 2 children. 2. I am blessed with 7 times her number. Look at my 7 sons. Look at my 7 daughters. Who can deny that I am the more fortunate? I am so rich in my blessings that I am beyond the reach of Fortuna herself. Should she take 1 or 2 of my children, I would still have far more than the barren Leto. You are wasting your time. Go. Take those laurel wreaths from your hair. Disperse from these altars at once. The women of Thebes, awed and intimidated by their queen, wavered. They slowly, silently unwound the laurels from their hair. They left the altars, the incense still smoking, the prayers unfinished. They had obeyed their mortal queen over the divine command. The insult was complete. But the gods see all. On her sacred island, Leto witnessed the public humiliation. She felt the sting of Niobe's scorn. Her heart burned with indignation. She called to her children, her voice trembling with the mother's pain and a goddess's wounded pride. "My children," she cried. "I, your mother, who was so proud to have borne you, am being driven from my own altars. A mortal woman, Niobe, dares to place her children above you. She calls me childless in comparison to her brood, and speaks with the wicked tongue of her father Tantalus." Apollo and Artemis listened. Their faces, usually so different, one of the sun, one of the moon, ardent into the same cold, resolute expression. Their mother's honor was their own. They offered her comfort, but their words were a promise of swift and terrible action. Veiling themselves in a golden cloud, they left Delos and descended with silent speed upon the 7-gated city of Thebes. Their vengeance would be as precise and as impersonal as a force of nature. The 7 sons of Niobe were exercising on the plains outside the city, reveling in their youth and strength. The eldest, Ismenus, was guiding his horse in a perfect circle when he suddenly cried out, clutching his chest. An arrow, unseen and unfired by any mortal hand, had pierced him through the heart. He slumped from his saddle, the reins falling from his lifeless fingers. Panic erupted. His brother Sipylus, seeing the horror, tried to flee, but a second arrow, just as silent and just as certain, caught him at the base of his neck. Apollo's golden bow was at work. One by one, the sons of Niobe fell. Two younger brothers, locked in a wrestling embrace, were transfixed by a single perfectly aimed shaft, dying together as they had lived. Another, seeing his brothers fall, was killed as he attempted to draw his bow. Another, praying with arms outstretched to the gods for mercy, was slain mid-prayer. The youngest, Ilioneus, seeing the slaughter, dropped his weapons and knelt, begging the heavens for his life. "Oh, all ye gods, I pray," he cried, not knowing which god he had offended. "Spare me." The archer god was moved by the boy's plea, and for a moment he hesitated. But the arrow was already loose from the string. Fate cannot be recalled. It struck the boy, and though the wound was the slightest of them all, it was enough to sever his soul from his body. In a matter of moments, 7 vibrant young men lay still upon the dusty field. Apollo's grim work was done. News of the massacre reached the palace. King Amphion, in his despair, drew his own sword and took his life. Niobe, her magnificent pride now a ruin, rushed to the field. She threw herself upon the cold bodies of her sons, kissing their silent lips for the last time. And there, in the depths of her unimaginable grief, her fatal hubris flickered back to life one last time. She raised her eyes to the heavens and screamed, her voice raw with pain and defiance. "Cruel Leto, feast on my sorrow. Gloat in your victory. But even in my ruin I still have more than you. I have lost 7, but 7 still remain." It was as if she had spoken a death sentence upon her own daughters. As the defiant words left her lips, the string of a silver bow hummed through the air. One by one, the 7 daughters of Niobe, who had gathered to comfort their grieving mother, began to fall. One, trying to pull the arrow from her sister's body, collapsed over her corpse. Another, struck as she tried to flee, fell in her tracks. A third died in her mother's desperate shielding arms. The last daughter, the youngest of all, tried to hide behind Niobe's body, and the queen wrapped herself around the child, screaming at the unseen executioners, "Leave me this one. Only the youngest one. From so many, I ask for only one." But the plea was in vain. The arrow found its mark. The last daughter went limp. Niobe was left alone, a queen of a silent kingdom of the dead. She sat among the bodies of her 14 children, her grief so immense, so profound, so heavy, that it turned her to stone. The gods, perhaps in a final act of cold pity, transformed her. A great whirlwind descended, snatched up the weeping statue, and carried her back to her homeland in Lydia. There, on a cliff face on Mount Sipylus, they placed her. And there she remains to this day, a rock formation that from a distance resembles the veiled face of a weeping woman. And from the porous stone, water constantly trickles, like the endless tears of a mother whose pride cost her everything she had ever loved. The hunt for Niobe's children was a brutal, terrifying display of divine order. It was not a hunt born of passion or sport, but a calculated, systematic eradication of hubris. Artemis and Apollo, the divine twins, acted as one, the perfect, deadly instruments of their mother's will. Their arrows were not just for the beasts of the forest, but for any mortal who, in their pride, dared to forget the unbridgeable chasm between themselves and the gods. Artemis's power was not confined to personal slights or the defense of her sacred groves. Her dominion over the wild, over the winds and the seas, meant that her displeasure could stall the very gears of human history. Her wrath could bring the greatest armies of the heroic age to a grinding, ignominious halt. Nowhere was this power more terribly demonstrated than at the port of Aulis. Here, the assembled might of Achaea was gathered. 1,000 ships, 100,000 warriors, the greatest coalition of heroes the world had ever known. The godlike Achilles, the cunning Odysseus, the mighty Ajax, all bound by a single oath. They were poised to launch the most legendary conflict of all time. The Trojan war to sail across the Aegean and reclaim the Spartan queen Helen. But they could not move. For weeks they waited. The winds refused to blow. An unnatural, suffocating calm held the fleet captive in the bay. The sea, usually alive with motion, lay dead. The army, once eager for glory and plunder, grew restless. Supplies dwindled, tempers flared, and the grand expedition teetered on the brink of collapse. The high king and commander of this vast force, Agamemnon of Mycenae, grew desperate. He consulted the army seer, the solemn Calchas, a man who could read the will of the gods in the flight of birds and the entrails of beasts. Calchas performed his rites, and when he spoke, his words delivered a chilling prophecy that fell like a shroud over the command tent. The windless calm was not a quirk of nature. It was the deliberate work of a god. It was the divine and intractable anger of Artemis. But why? Why was the virgin huntress so enraged at the Greek host? The ancient poets, as they often do, offer differing accounts for her fury. The playwright Sophocles suggests that Agamemnon committed a direct act of hubris. During a hunt in one of her sacred groves, he brought down a magnificent stag. Flushed with his own skill, he boasted aloud, his words echoing foolishly among the sacred trees. Even Artemis herself could not have made a better shot. It was the same fatal arrogance that had doomed Niobe, a mortal hunter daring to compare his own fleeting skill to the peerless mastery of the immortal. Another version, told by the tragedian Euripides, claims the anger was ancestral, a punishment for a forgotten crime. Agamemnon's father, Atreus, had once promised to sacrifice the finest lamb in his flock to the goddess, but when a lamb with a golden fleece was born, his greed overcame his piety. He hid the lamb away and sacrificed the lesser one, thinking the goddess would not notice. She noticed. And the debt had now come due generations later. Whatever the cow's a boastful word or a broken promise, the effect was absolute. The goddess of the hunt held the winds of the Aegean hostage. And Calchas the seer now revealed the terrible price she demanded to set them free. It was a price designed to humble a king, a price of unimaginable horror. The anger of the virgin goddess can only be appeased by the blood of a virgin, Calchas proclaimed, his voice heavy with doom. O King Agamemnon, you must sacrifice your own firstborn daughter, Iphigenia, upon the altar of Artemis. A storm of choice more violent than any sea broke within the king's heart. Kill his own child? His beloved Iphigenia? The thought was monstrous, a violation of the most sacred bond of nature. But how could he, as commander-in-chief, abandon the entire Greek expedition? How could he face the other kings, the entire army, and send them home in disgrace, the great oath to reclaim Helen broken before it had even begun? He was trapped between his love as a father and his sworn duty as a king. For days he agonized. But the pressure from the army, led by the impatient Odysseus and his own brother Menelaus, was immense. Ultimately, ambition, honor, and the crushing weight of command won out. He consented to the horrific act. A cruel deception was then devised, for they knew his wife, Queen Clytemnestra, would never surrender their daughter to the knife. A message was dispatched to the palace at Mycenae. It was a lie wrapped in a golden promise. Clytemnestra was to bring Iphigenia to Aulis, not for a sacrifice, but for a glorious wedding. She was to be married, the letter said, to the greatest hero of the age, the swift-footed Achilles. And so Iphigenia arrived at the sprawling, dusty camp, not for a wedding, but for her own funeral. She came dreaming of a heroic husband, only to be met by a sacrificial altar. When the truth was revealed, the camp was thrown into chaos. Clytemnestra's pleading cries turned to furious curses. Achilles, enraged that his name and honor had been used to lure the girl to her death, drew his sword and vowed to defend her. But the will of the army, desperate for wind and war, had hardened into a single, bloodthirsty demand. They turned on Achilles, stones in their hands, clamoring for the sacrifice. The life of one girl, they reasoned, was a small price to pay for the glory of Greece. In a moment of terrible, sublime nobility, it was Iphigenia herself who ended the debate. Seeing that there was no escape, and that her death was the only path forward for the cause of Hellas, she accepted her fate. She silenced her mother's weeping and faced her father with the dignity that shamed the kings and heroes who surrounded her. "Father," she said, her voice clear and steady, "all the greatness of Greece now looks to you and to me. If Artemis desires my life, who am I, a mortal, to oppose a goddess? I give my life to Greece. Lead me to the altar. Let my blood release the winds and bring ruin to Troy. This will be my monument, my marriage, my children for all time." She was led to the altar. The soldiers wept. The priest raised the sacrificial knife. Agamemnon, the great king, turned his face away, pulling his cloak over his head, his body racked with sobs, unable to witness the death he had commanded. The blade flashed in the sun. And then a miracle. Or rather, a divine sleight of hand. In the version of the story that offers a sliver of mercy, at the very instant the knife was to touch her skin, Artemis intervened. She shrouded the scene in a thick, sudden mist. The priest's hand struck nothing. When the fog cleared, Iphigenia was gone. Lying on the altar in her place was a magnificent deer, its throat cut, its blood pooling on the sacred stone. The goddess, having tested the faith and obedience of the Greeks to their absolute limit, had accepted a substitute. The price was paid. A beast for a girl. The hunt was concluded. And at once the winds began to blow, strong and favorable, rushing into the harbor. The sea came alive. The Greek army, their passage now cleared by blood, erupted in cheers. They sailed for Troy and for 10 years of war. But what of Iphigenia? She was not dead. Artemis had spirited her away across the sea to the far-off, savage land of Taurus on the edge of the known world. There she was installed as the high priestess in the goddess's own temple. A position of honor, but also a gilded cage in a land of barbarians. And here, the chilling paradox of Artemis deepens. For the rituals at this temple were savage. The custom of the Taurians was to sacrifice any foreigner, any Greek, who was shipwrecked on their shores. The saved victim of sacrifice was now forced to preside over the sacrifice of others, her hand stained with the blood of her own countrymen. The hunt for Iphigenia at Aulis reveals a different facet of Artemis's nature. This was not a hunt of passionate rage. It was a cold, political transaction. A demonstration of her absolute power over the natural world in the grand affairs of men. She demanded the ultimate price for a transgression, pushing mortals to the brink of an unspeakable act simply to prove their fear and her dominion. Her last-minute mercy was not a sign of softness but a final, masterful assertion of control. She had made her point. The most powerful army in the world had bent its knee to her will. In the grim pantheon of bloody tales that surround the name of Artemis, one story stands apart. It resonates with a different, more tragic frequency. It is not a story of a mortal's hubris, nor of a vow broken by force or treachery. It is a story of a peer, a companion, a kindred spirit. It is a tale tinged not with the cold fire of righteous fury, but with something that could be mistaken for affection, and what was certainly, in the end, a profound and eternal regret. This is the enigmatic story of the giant hunter Orion. Orion was a being of mythic stature. A giant, some said, a son of the sea god Poseidon, who had granted him the miraculous ability to walk upon the waves as if they were solid ground. He was a hunter without parallel among mortals, a magnificent and powerful figure who roamed the wildest corners of the earth. And in the wilderness, the domain she called her own, he met Artemis. Here for the first time was a man who did not seek to possess her. He did not stumble by accident or design into her sacred space. He did not gaze upon her with lust, but with a hunter's respect. In Orion, the virgin goddess found not a suitor or a worshipper, but a reflection of her own untamed spirit. He loved the chase, the freedom of the forest, the scent of the cool night air, the challenge of the hunt. He understood the silent language of the wild. They became hunting partners, a companionship unique in all of mythology. Together, with Orion's faithful hound Sirius and Artemis's own silver dogs, they pursued the most formidable beasts across the mountains of Crete. The goddess of the hunt and the greatest mortal hunter, side by side. The forests echoed with the sounds of their unparalleled chase. But this newfound companionship, this harmony between the divine maiden and the mortal giant, did not go unnoticed. And it was deeply, profoundly troubling to one god in particular, her twin brother, the glorious and protective Apollo. Apollo's motives, like so much in these ancient tales, are a matter of scholarly debate. Was he acting out of fraternal protection, fearing that this profound friendship might blossom into love and cause Artemis to break her sacred, foundational vow of virginity? Was he consumed by a subtle jealousy that his twin, his other half in the cosmic order, had found a companion who seemed to understand her wild spirit in a way that he, the god of civilization and order, never could? Or perhaps, as other versions of the myth suggest, he was provoked by Orion's own hubris. Some say the giant, in a fit of pride, boasted that he would hunt down and exterminate every single beast on the face of the earth. This was an affront to Gaia, the primordial Earth Mother herself, who, in this telling, sent a monstrous scorpion to deal with him. Whatever his reason, be it protection, jealousy, or offense, Apollo decided that Orion had to be removed from his sister's life. And to do so, he devised a plan of exquisite and devastating cruelty, a plan that would turn his sister's greatest pride, her most formidable skill, into the very instrument of her sorrow. One day, Apollo saw Orion waiting far out in the sea, so distant that his head was just a dark, indistinct dot bobbing on the shimmering horizon. He sought out his sister, who was on the shore, practicing with her silver bow. With an air of feigned, casual challenge, he gestured towards the distant sea. "Sister," he said, his voice smooth and persuasive, "you are a peerless archer, it is true. But I wager that even your famous skill is not great enough to strike that tiny dark object so far out upon the water." Artemis, ever proud, her competitive spirit ignited by the challenge from her own twin, took the bait. It was an irresistible dare to her honor as the supreme archer of the cosmos. In that moment, she did not know what the target was, nor did she care. It was simply a mark to be hit, a challenge to be met. She nocked an arrow, drew back the string of her mighty bow until it touched her breast, and took aim. Her focus was absolute, her form perfect. She released. The arrow flew, a silver gleam across the waves, silent, swift, and unerringly true. It struck the distant target dead center. Perfect shot. Pleased with her marksmanship, she turned to her brother with a triumphant smile. Apollo's own smile was thin and unreadable. "Let us go and see what you have hit," he suggested. She thought no more of it until the gentle waves of the tide washed her prize ashore. And there, lying in the surf with the foam turning red around him, was the body of Orion. Her own silver arrow was embedded deep in his head. The horror of her realization was absolute. She had been tricked. Tricked by her own brother into murdering the one person in all the worlds who had been her friend, her companion, her equal. Her famous rage did not erupt. It was replaced by something colder, heavier, and far more profound. A grief so immense it silenced the world around her. She, the protectress, had become the unwitting executioner. She whose arrows brought justice had delivered the ultimate injustice. The blood on her hands was, for the first and only time, the blood of someone whose only crime was to be her friend. In her sorrow, she could not bear the thought of his body being left to the decay of the earth. In a final act of love and remembrance, she took her fallen friend and his loyal hound, Sirius, and placed them among the stars. There he could hunt for all eternity, a shining beacon in the winter sky, a constant memorial to her grief. Even now we see him, the great hunter with his belt and sword, forever striding across the heavens. And in some tellings he is forever pursued by the constellation Scorpius, the very beast sent by Gaia to kill him, placed in the sky by the gods to ensure they never occupy it at the same time. The story of Orion is the great tragedy of the Artemis mythos. It offers a rare, painful glimpse of a different side of the goddess, not the vengeful virgin, but the grieving friend. His death was not a righteous punishment or a necessary defense of her purity. It was a murder by proxy, an assassination born of a brother's fear or jealousy. It is perhaps the bloodiest of her hunts, because the blood spilled was, in her own eyes, truly innocent, and it serves as a somber, celestial reminder that even for a goddess, power and skill can be turned into instruments of profound tragedy, and that the heart of the eternal maiden was not entirely made of stone. A crack was formed, and through it, a glimmer of sorrowful, almost human regret, shone out into the cold lunar light. And so we return from the wild groves and the blood-stained altars, our journey through the moonlit domain of Artemis now complete. We have walked the paths of her mythology, from her willful forging on the Isle of Delos to the tragic consequences for those who crossed her path, whether by malice, by hubris, or by simple, fatal chance. What then are we to make of this complex and formidable goddess? This deity of stark and chilling contradictions? Is she a monster cloaked in divine beauty? A protector with a terrifyingly narrow definition of who is worthy of that protection? To judge Artemis by the fluid, compassionate standards of modern human morality is to miss the point of her entirely. It is to measure a thunderstorm with a teaspoon. She is not human. She is not bound by our ethics or our sentiment. Artemis is the embodiment of a primal, untamable force. She is the wild itself. Consider a force of nature. A hurricane is possessed of a terrifying, awesome beauty. It is a raw expression of the planet's power. It does not distinguish between the righteous and the wicked. It does not weigh intent. Simply is. It scours clean what lies in its path. So too is Artemis. Her laws are not the laws of ethics. They are akin to the laws of physics. Her domain is the wilderness, and in the wilderness, the rules have always been simple, brutal, and absolute. Survival, dominion, boundaries. Her eternal virginity is the absolute cornerstone of this identity. We must understand it not as a state of passivity but as an aggressive declaration of sovereignty. In a patriarchal cosmos where female deities were so often defined by their relationships as wives, mothers, conquests, or pawns, Artemis refused definition by anyone but herself. Her chastity was her power. It was her freedom. It made her territory, both physical and personal, absolute. And any intrusion into that territory, whether it was the accidental gaze of Actaeon, the treacherous violation of Callisto, or the arrogant boast of Agamemnon, was met with the full, devastating force of a natural law being broken. Her reaction was not personal hatred, it was a cosmic rebalancing. Her bloody hunts, therefore, are the enforcement of this sovereignty. They are not acts of simple malice but of maintaining cosmic order. The arrows of Artemis and Apollo that fell upon the 14 children of Niobe were like lightning from a clear sky, a sudden, impersonal, and absolute correction of an imbalance caused by mortal hubris. The sacrifice demanded at Aulis was the terrible price the world of men had to pay for disrespecting the world of the wild. It was a tax, paid in blood, for passage through her domain. Yet, within this fierce, uncompromising nature, the paradox remains, and it is this paradox that makes her so eternally compelling. She is the protector of the most vulnerable. The newborn fawn, the human infant, the mother in the throes of labor all fall under her specific and gentle care. She is at her core a goddess of boundaries. She guards the sacred boundary between the womb and the world at birth. And she violently enforces the boundary that separates her divine, untamed world from the encroaching world of mortals. She is the moon and the arrow, the serene silver light that guides the lost traveler and illuminates the hunter's path, and the sharp, silent point that delivers unerring death. She is a timeless, enduring symbol of wild, untamable feminine power, a power that does not ask for permission, that will not be controlled, and that defends its integrity with the lethality that has echoed through the ages. Artemis reminds us that some forces, some places, and some beings in this world and in the worlds beyond are not meant to be tamed. They are not meant to be understood in our terms. They are meant only to be respected, admired from a safe distance, and for our own sake, left undisturbed. For to trespass in the sacred grove of the Virgin Huntress is to invite a swift, and secret, and bloody end. Thank you for joining us at the Eldritch Codex, as we journeyed into the heart of the wilderness with Artemis. The myths of this formidable goddess are fraught with tragedy, power, and a moral landscape that challenges our modern views. Which of her tales do you find the most compelling or the most terrifying? Does the fate of Actaeon serve as a just warning, or is the tragedy of Callisto a greater injustice? What does Artemis represent to you in the modern age? Share your thoughts and interpretations in the chronicles below. Call it our comment section. Your insights are a vital part of our exploration. If you wish to continue delving into the forgotten corners of myth, magic, and ancient lore, be sure to subscribe to the Eldritch Codex and ring the celestial bell of notification. That way you will never miss an entry into our library of secrets. Until next time, may you walk the old paths with wisdom and never, ever stumble into a sacred grove uninvited.